It's November 19, 2019, release day for Eberron, Rising from the Last War. Today we'll be taking a pretty detailed look at this book, and I'll tell you what I think so you can decide if the book is right for you. Let's dig in. Well, hey there everybody, Nate here from WASD 20. Here it is, Eberron, Rising from the Last War. Explore the lands of Eberron in this campaign sourcebook for the world's greatest role-playing game. Two different covers here. You've got the standard edition cover, and of course you've got the collector's edition cover. I'm not sure if they're still doing it where these are only available in hobby shops, but in the past that's been the case. I absolutely love this cover. I think this is one of the first special edition covers not done by Hydro74. It's actually done by, I think his name is Vance Kelly, and man, I absolutely love it. It's got that metallic shine to it, and just an expansive landscape of just imagination. You've got the Warforged here, you've got these floating islands, you've got airships, you've got what I'm assuming is the city of Sharn here. Absolutely beautiful, very well done. And then you've got this one. I'm sorry, I don't know. This just feels like unfinished. Like, look at that. It looks like someone started making a digital painting and just stopped. And yeah, the background is just kind of drab and it just feels unfinished, and you've got this very static pose. Other than the fact that this is a Warforged here, it doesn't say Eberron to me. I think that's one of the bigger things. So, I don't know. Not feeling that one. Definitely loving this one. But enough about the cover. Let's talk about the contents of the book. So I'm gonna blast through the contents pretty fast because it's a long book. It's 320 pages. So we're gonna be flipping pages like mad here. So first chapter is all about Eberron, and I do want to spend some time for those who don't know what Eberron is, just explaining a little bit of the basics that are laid out here in the Welcome to Eberron chapter, which is not chapter 1, it's chapter 0 or something. But some of the basics here. Eberron I would definitely describe as a higher fantasy, definitely higher tech than something like Faerun, the Forgotten Realms. Definitely has a bit more high-tech science and magic kind of blending and becoming one. And you've got this aspect of Eberron that is the last war has ended, sort of. All right, so you've got this last war. The game is set in the ruins of this war. People are trying to kind of rebuild here and recover from this devastating, cataclysmic war. And that just makes for some really interesting stories that can be told, I think. There's also some information kind of about the feel of these adventures. It's pulp adventures, so it's high adventure, swashbuckling, flying ships and all that stuff. And yet it is also noir intrigue, hard-boiled fiction. So everyone has regrets, there's shades of gray and lots of personal motives. Everyone's got something to lose. And then you've got this aspect that it's a magical world. It's very kind of high-tech. Communication and transportation are very advanced. You've got the lightning rail, you've got flying ships, huge war machines and things like that. So yeah, and then there's a little description here of the last war. Overall, I really like this chapter because it provides enough information without being overwhelming. It's all over and done with by page 15, which I really appreciate because I have very little patience for reading long, just text blocks of lore and history. The other thing I'll say about Eberron is that it was created back in the 3.5 edition days as part of a contest that Wizards of the Coast run to create a new D&D setting. Tons and tons, thousands of users submitted their like one-page setting idea, and the one that was chosen that eventually won the contest was none other than Keith Baker's Eberron. So pretty cool. So that is how it developed. There were some 3.5 edition books in Eberron. There were many 4th edition books and even some novels and things like that. So that's a little history of the setting. Let's get into the chapter on character creation. The main thing I want to talk about here is the various races, as well as a new class and dragon marks. So, races. You've got changelings, these kind of shape-shiftery beings. You've got information on dwarves and dragonborn, which you can find the full stats for in the player's handbook, but here they just have a couple paragraphs describing their place in Eberron. The same thing is true of elves. Elves have some really cool lore in Eberron. Gnomes. You've got goblinoids, so you can actually play a hobgoblin, bugbear, or goblin in Eberron. Half-elves, halflings, humans, Kalishtar, which are these really cool kind of spirit beings that are very wise and pretty much appear like humans, but they're pretty cool. You've got orcs and half-orcs, which are playable races in Eberron, and you've got shifters, which are somewhat related to lycanthropes, so like werewolves and stuff like that. So they're these very bestial beings. So there's an example of one right there. Some information on tieflings in Eberron, and my personal favorite, the Warforged. Warforged are these giant kind of metal and wood and sinew constructs that were created for the purpose of fighting in the last war. What makes them really interesting to me is that notion that they're created to fight in the last war, and now the war is over. So now what? And that's just kind of an interesting thing, I think, to be able to role play and explore if you were playing a Warforged character. And you've also got the idea that they're not created to be very emotional, and yet some of them are becoming very emotional and are becoming real sentient beings, a real species in this world, even if they were originally constructs. So that's another interesting thing that a Warforged character could explore. Then we've got dragon marks. Dragon marks appear on the flesh, somewhere on the body of certain people, and give them certain properties. The marks of detection, finding, handling, healing, hospitality, making, passage, scribing, sentinel, shadow, storm, warding. So all of these marks give certain benefits on the person on whom they appear, and they basically are going to replace either the racial traits or the sub-race traits, because they're going to give their own sort of benefit. And they only appear on certain races. So the mark of finding, for example, can appear on a half-orc or a human. The mark of detection will appear on half-elves, and so you could choose to have one of these marks or not, and it carries with it certain benefits and properties. If you're a spellcaster, it comes with certain spells that you can add to your list, and each of them is also associated with a house. House Vidalis, House Jarasco, etc., etc. And so you have that kind of affiliation, although you could be sort of a rogue member of that house. Then we get into the section on the new class, the Artificer. A lot of people are really excited about finally a new class in D&D 5th edition, and this one, Arcane Science, I think really sums it up. This is going to be someone who uses science and studying and tinkering and building things to harness magic. The magic doesn't necessarily flow through them the way it does for a sorcerer or a warlock or something like that. Rather, you can tinker and build things and learn more scientifically in order to harness the power of magic. So they're going to be very adept in using tools and tinkering and building things. Like, for example, an alchemist might be. That's one of the specialists here. But you've also got the artillerist, using magic to hurl energy projectiles and explosions on a battlefield. And then the third specialty is the battlesmith, which says armies require protection. A combination of protector and medic, a battlesmith is an expert in defending others and repairing both material and personnel. And they get a steel defender. Look at that adorable metal pooch. So several pages on the Artificer there, and it seems like a cool new class that I'm sure a lot of people will be very excited to play. You've got a section here on patrons, so your group can choose a patron for your adventuring party. This is an optional thing, but there's basically all these organizations. I won't go through them all, but they come with some pretty cool things. They come with some benefits, but also I think some obligations, and you've got ideas for contacts, adventures, so tools that the DM could really use depending on what patron the group has selected. There's a lot of good stuff here, and that's one theme that we'll see throughout this book, is there's lots of these role tables that can provide story hooks and adventure ideas, so I really appreciate that inclusion. It makes it a very practical book. You'll find a lot of that sort of thing also in chapters 2 and 3. Chapter 2 is all about Corvair, which is kind of the main nation, if you can call it that, or the main continent in Eberron. There are others as well. I'll show you the map here. There's this map that shows Corvair, And that's what chapter 2 is all about. And there's also a tear-out map from the back here that expands on that and does show some of the other regions, although almost everything is likely going to take place in Corvair for most Eberron campaigns. So there's lots and lots of information on the various regions in Corvair. And kind of how they fit into the world and interesting things that are happening and characters that players might meet in these places and things like that. You've also got this section in chapter 2 on the faiths of Corvair, the deities here, foundations of faith, and several faith organizations and religions. So that's all good stuff. And then we get into chapter 3, all about Sharn, the city of towers. There's this really cool map of Sharn. I have a feeling that this map may have been recycled from a previous edition, and that's also the case with the big map. I did find that. I think it's in the 4th edition book, maybe the 3.5 edition as well. So on the one hand, it's kind of a bummer to see some recycled art like that. It would have been nice for them to make something new for a new book, but I also kind of get it. It's definitely a way they can save money. Still, I'm not a huge fan of the style of these maps, personally. They're fine, I guess, just not my preferred style. So this section has lots of stuff on important districts of Sharn here, noteworthy locations, lots and lots of stuff like that. Good tools for the DM once players start kind of exploring it. You got this section on criminal activities here, various contacts, and then we get into chapter 4, Building Eberron Adventures. And when I say that this book is practical and has lots of tools for DMs, I am especially thinking of chapter 4 here. This is probably my favorite chapter. First off, for someone who's fairly new to Eberron like myself, it's really helpful to have these adventure themes, things like recurring villains and lots of information about how to develop villains, action, how to have the kind of pulp action that you would expect in an Eberron campaign, and then intrigue as well. So story kickoff, new development, story opening, plot thickens, really useful stuff for a DM, and don't have to be specific to Eberron necessarily. It could be absolutely useful stuff for any DM. And then the rest of chapter 4 here mostly gets into various organizations, but also a few locations and things like that, and events, and yeah, there's just kind of this division. Oh, you even have this section just on goblinoids here. So there's just a wide variety of topics here and categories of helpful tools for building adventures in Eberron. And I'll say outside of Eberron as well. Tons and tons of adventure hooks, NPCs, missions, cults of the dragon below. It's just so absolutely full of roll tables and maps. So yeah, really appreciate the inclusion of maps in here as well. There are quite a few of them. Most of them, it looks like all of them, I would say, drawn by Dyson Logos. So pretty simple style, but really cool dungeon maps and location maps. This one even looks like it's got some lava going on, this demon ruin. There's a section on travel here. And now they do mention that this chapter really tries to expand on, I think it's chapter 3 of the Dungeon Master's Guide. And I think it does a great job of that overall. Like there's just so much material here. Look at all this stuff. Mysterious Passengers roll table, life in the city of Sharn, the attractions, street events, just so much practical information and tools for the Dungeon Master. I feel like I'm being repetitive, but it just goes on and on. There's just a lot of good stuff. The last part of chapter 4 here is an actual adventure called Forgotten Relics, and I think this is a really great inclusion because when you're new to a system, or for that matter, a setting like this, it is especially useful and helpful to have a pre-written adventure to help you get a feel for what adventures in this setting might be like. So yeah, this seems like a pretty cool little adventure here. It's set in the city of Sharn, and it has a lot of kind of the hallmarks, things you would expect in an Eberron adventure. And I imagine it would probably take maybe 2 sessions. It's kind of hard for me to judge. There's a lot of text here. I mean, it is about, I don't know, 10 or more pages, I think. But it's kind of hard for me to judge exactly how long it would take. So anyway, definitely a big thumbs up from me for Wizards of the Coast for including a short adventure. And then we get into chapter 5 here. This is all about magic items. And yeah, there's definitely some cool magic items. There's about 25 in all, so it's not tons of them, but there's some cool magic items there. It's not a standout chapter in my mind by any means, but I do think it is an important inclusion for a setting book to have some setting-specific magic items. And then we've got chapter 6 here, Foes and Friends. This is basically a bestiary with some lore and some stat blocks and things like that of, you know, some really interesting and very creepy creatures for sure. So I won't go through all of that. But yeah, there's some good stuff there. All in all, there's almost 40 pages here, I think, of creatures. So that's a pretty good selection for sure. And that is the book. So before I end with some kind of closing thoughts here, I just did want to point out one other thing that as I was going through the book, it actually kind of bothered me and it's been eating away at me. And that is the art style. Overall, there's a lot of this kind of traditional 5e art style that's very heavily into that kind of almost like oil painted look that you get in a lot of this stuff here. But then there's also quite a bit of what I'm guessing is recycled art. And go ahead and correct me if I'm wrong here, if this is not the case, but I feel like I've seen this one before in the Wayfinder's Guide to Eberron, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of that art was recycled from 3.5 and 4th edition Eberron books. So you've got pieces like this here, which this is cool. This is a cool scene, but it's very different in style. It's definitely got kind of a comic booky style overall. Here's another example right here, and I think there's another one right here. Like this looks like something out of a comic book, and then you've also got this style often side by side, and it's more of that kind of painterly style for sure that is more traditional in 5th edition art. So that's something that kind of bugged me. A, it kind of bugs me if they are recycling art from older books, and B, the kind of incongruent styles kind of bug me. That I just feel like, you know, I think you got to go with one or the other. You got to go with the Wayne Reynolds here, or you got to go with kind of the more traditional 5e art style. But trying to put them both together, to me, it just doesn't work. So that might be kind of a nitpicky thing, but as you can see from many of my reviews, I do judge a book by its cover and by its pretty pictures. So to provide some closing thoughts and summarize here, I do have a few nitpicks with the book for sure, but the actual meat of the book, the content, I think is excellent. I think they've done a really good job of creating a setting book that doesn't have tons and tons of history and lore, but actually is peppered throughout with usable game content. Roll tables and inspiration and story hooks and maps and all that stuff that I keep repeating over and over again. But I really do think that's the high point here, and it easily overshines for me some of the nitpicks I have about the cover or the art not matching very well. In terms of the setting of Eberron itself, everything is really well done. The lore was inspiring. I still am not totally convinced that Eberron is for me. I tend to favor a bit more of a low fantasy, gritty sort of feel. At the same time, if I ever encountered a DM who was passionate about running an Eberron game, I would definitely jump on board with that. I'm not sure I'm that DM, but it definitely seems like a really cool setting, and the book is very well executed overall. The game is now available in game shops, bookshops, wherever D&D stuff is sold, and of course online retailers like Miniature Market and Amazon. If you do end up buying the book on Amazon, I have an affiliate link down in the video description, and buying through those links is a great way to support the channel at no extra cost to you. So I would love to hear your thoughts on the book down in the comments below. If you have any additional questions, leave those down below as well. And before we go, of course, I want to thank my patrons so much for their support. Patrons are the lifeblood of this channel. They provide support on a monthly basis, and they also get some pretty cool rewards. So thank you so much, patrons, for all that you do. And if you want to join with them and support this content, I would greatly appreciate it. Head on over to patreon.com/WASD20 and check it out. All right, that's all for this one, everybody. Make sure you're subscribed. Go ahead and hit that bell icon down below too, so you can get notifications when I post new videos. And that's it. Take care, everybody. You'll see me again very soon.